put together a lot of it. And I'll be sure to be leaning on Marion as well. All right, let me just see who we have in the meeting. Welcome, welcome. All right, and this is going over the bylaws survey that I believe everyone who was in here must have answered. So let's go ahead and just get started with how the survey went.
Great. So quick introductions, and we'll go into survey results. But our survey methodologically, 44 responses. People whose emails we had who are in the Libertarian Party of Oregon were emailed a link to take a survey. And you folks who are on this call are the 46.2% who wanted to be invited to come and discuss our bylaws on this Zoom meeting. So you are very special, 46.2%. And now on to the results. Timothy, Marion. Just quick note on the structure here. The colors are blue for support, red for oppose. Where there were other comments, those are color coded, and I've dropped those in here to make them legible so that they can be reviewed by the body.
All right, sounds good. Thank you. All right, so expanding the LPO purpose to include nonpartisan races, overwhelmingly supported. There were a couple of comments that were not supportive, but one of them was, as you can see there on the screen, no opposition, and then one of them was merely cautiousness. I will mention that at least we don't have the language right here on the slide, but the language that the bylaws committee is currently looking at do not allow for the public policy board to endorse any nonpartisan candidates that are not a member of the party or advocate for the LPO to give resources to them. So just as far as this comment with regards to being cautious about supporting parties that are against any of the core principles of the LPO, we won't be supporting members of other parties, and we also will be handing most of the ability to interact with the nonpartisan races as far as in a manner of endorsement to the public policy board. Marion or Pablo, do you have anything further on that before we ask for comments?
Well, I think that yeah, I think you pretty much covered it there. We do have language in there specifically limiting it to Libertarian Party members, so there should be no concern of us supporting people from other parties.
All right, great. So now I'll ask for any comments from our observers.
I think this is great. I think most people agree. We really should be focusing on things like school board races and other things like that. So.
And just to sort of add some color, that I don't think that this means the Libertarian Party will focus solely on those local races, but I think in terms of the opportunity and all the data that we have, this is a better use of our time and a very good investment in terms of the long-term play here. We need to develop a bench of leaders. We need people who are experienced in sort of the levers of government, and this is a really good opportunity to go city by city, school board by school board, and sort of with an eye towards the future, look at people that we can foster to make change in their community, and then in the larger, broader community of Oregon. So really excited about this.
Yeah, well, obviously it has a lot of support. So I believe that the bylaws committee will be formally going over the various proposals and deciding on language at our next meeting. But as far as what you can expect for those of you watching this, I'd say anything that gets over 90% support is definitely going to be something that we're forwarding to the convention. All right, Pablo, would you please pull up the next one? All right, so this is removing a reference to a specific subtype of single transferable vote in our bylaws. Libertarians, I found, are often nerds about various methods of voting. I include myself very proudly with that label. And there can be passion about whether one is superior to the other. But as far as the practical consequences of selecting one or the other, we have found that the specific subtype of single transferable vote, called the right system of single transferable vote, does not, I should say, have support with online election softwares that we've looked at. And we've specifically looked for that specific version of single transferable vote. And so it is adding a fair amount of technical efforts and also volunteer time to collect votes electronically. But in the past, we've done this by mail with physical ballots, but this upcoming leadership election is the first time that we're doing it fully electronically for the collection of votes. And then we then have to take the raw data that the election software gives us and process it through our own proprietary software. And just adding those steps is costing a lot of volunteer time for not a lot of benefit, although of course I can see how people, again, can be passionate about how various forms of the various voting methods can be. I can relate to that. Obviously, overwhelming support here as well. Almost 85% out of the 39 responses on this one. And with regards to the opposition comment down here, there are several methods of single transferable vote, and the bylaws should be specific. I would be open to hearing from anyone else, or if the individual who made this comment is on our call, I'd be open to hearing more about this. But I think that the sense of the bylaws committee has been that the different versions of single transferable vote are not different enough to warrant calling out a specific subtype when it causes the logistical issue that the party is facing. If you left this comment, if you're on this call and would like to share, please do speak up.
That person is not on this call.
Okay, thank you. All right. Does anyone else?
I would love to hear if Annie has any insight on that. We do have a voting expert on the call. I wonder do you believe that the differences in types of single transferable vote are so different that it would cause insufferable amounts of debate?
I'm not an expert on proportional representation, so I just want to put that up front. So I don't know for sure, but my sense is that there aren't, really important differences between the different types of STV. But I might ask some people who are experts in this and just see what they think. And, I can let you guys know what I find out. But my feeling is that the differences aren't important enough to worry about, but I could be wrong about that.
Right. And often the difference between entirely different voting methods, say if we're comparing single transferable vote to approval voting or star voting or what have you, even the differences between entirely different systems are going to be more at the margins, although obviously there will be more difference there. But then that gets less and less as you're comparing different systems of the exact same overall voting method.
Yeah, and especially when you're talking about proportional representation, because the very proportionality of it and the fact that you have multiple seats that you're filling tends to kind of even out any of the problems that you might have with one system or another. So yeah, especially with proportional representation, I think it's not as crucial which version you're using.
And for the viewers at home, I just want to mention that Annie Callan is a thought leader and in this space. She is the chair of the Equal Vote Coalition and an expert who has provided testimony to the Oregon State Legislature and who I believe has been quoted in newspapers regarding star voting. So we're really lucky to have her as a Libertarian Party of Oregon member.
Well, that's why I'd like to ask Annie that STV looks like star voting is included in STV. Is that an accurate assessment?
No. So the way you can think about it is there's single winner methods and then there's multi-winner methods, and one type of multi-winner method would be proportional representation. So single winner methods include star voting and instant runoff voting, which are both allowed by our bylaws. And then proportional multi-winner methods include STV, which is the proportional version of ranked choice, or star PR, which is the proportional version of star voting. So it's kind of a grid.
Okay, so we're saying that the idea of initiating STV was challenging because I mean, you and I had this conversation on the podcast one time, and we weren't talking about STV, we were talking about star voting and other things. So
yeah,
now
proportional version is always going to be more complicated than
right, and because you're actually literally your one vote with the rank choice that you give there is actually voting for multiple positions.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Where in a star voting system, where you do a ranked choice type of system, you're only voting for one seat.
I mean, for the proportional version of star, it's similar to the proportional version of ranked choice, STV, where you're filling out one ballot and then the multiple seats are filled from that. So that's the same in both.
Okay. All right. I think I understand. Thank you.
It's very confusing, especially when you're trying to explain it verbally. So yeah.
We need your nifty graphs and stuff out there, and you know, and yeah, thank you very much. I trust your knowledge quite well, so I was really impressed when we had this conversation previously. So thank you very much for your service.
And again, for those of you watching on YouTube afterward, you could go into some deep rabbit holes with regards to voting methodologies, and people could get real passionate about it. So I just want to say that I really appreciate having discussion on it. I really enjoy those types of things. Any further discussion on this particular proposal before we move to the results of the next survey question? Okay, Pablo, would you please pull the next one up? Thank you. All right, adding none of the below. This is an extremely niche voting methodology question, basically. In Libertarian Party circles especially, there has been a tradition at the national level, as well as with some state Libertarian parties, to include none of the above, where you have the option to write none of the above as your vote. And what you're saying is that none of the candidates who are running in this race are acceptable to you. And that's usually used for internal elections, although it does also apply at the National Convention to the selection of the presidential and vice presidential candidates. And how that works mechanically is that if none of the above scores higher than all of the candidates that are present in the race, then the race is reset and none of those candidates are eligible to run in the next iteration. And none of the below is a modifier of that, where it's simply saying that whichever candidates in a multi-winner, typically in a multi-winner, otherwise it would function the same as none of the above. Any candidates that rank lower in votes than none of the above would similarly be eliminated from consideration. And so it's basically a way of expressing a negative form of support. And
It's kind of like, I
Go
like
ahead,
to add a little bit of, is that where none of the above nullifies all of the candidates, none of the below nullifies some of the candidates and allows you to say some are acceptable.
right, which again, that largely comes into play with multi-winner elections. But yeah, it basically allows you to give a negative value with regards to some of the candidates. We have a question from our local voting nerd, Annie, please.
Yeah, I was just trying to wrap my head around this, and I was chatting with Marion and with Adam Zielinski about this, and I'm not sure I quite understand, so I just want to try to clarify. The as it's written here, it says by adding none of the below in ranked elections. By that, do you mean both the instant runoff
Right. So
and also the star voting?
So
option?
creating a separate rule to say none of the above for single winner elections
Right.
didn't seem efficient when
Okay.
when the same rule can apply, even though in that case it operates the same as when we do none of the above at
So
like
it's
the
for
national
the single
party
winner, it's for the proportional, but then it's also for the instant runoff and also for the star voting. Okay.
Right, and I haven't actually looked into. I'm more familiar with the other forms of voting, even though I have, of course, embraced star. I'm just more familiar because the party has used the other forms more, so I'm more familiar with how it interacts mechanically.
Okay.
I can't think of any reason why it wouldn't work fine with star or the proportional representation version of star. But if you like, you're more used to thinking in that world. So if you have, you know, an unexpected consequence that you see arising out of that or something, then we'd love to hear that.
So first, let me make sure I understand how it would work for the ranked choice options. If through the course of the eliminations, the none of the below option wins an election, then you stop running the election and stop assigning seats. Is that how that would work for STV?
That's basically correct. Yeah.
Okay.
And we would want to be we would want to be very careful in crafting this bylaw to make sure that the intentional, like you could accidentally make it so that it even was eliminating people in earlier rounds if you worded your bylaw incorrectly. But I think that the intent is to whenever none of the below, excuse me, finally wins a seat, then the election stops. I believe that's the intention.
Okay. I think in principle that works for star voting. The only concern is I was talking to Adam about it, and he was saying that could incentivize people to give like 5 stars to their favorite and maybe 5 stars to none of the below. I don't know. It's
right.
There might be strategic incentives that we're not
with
fully...
proportional representation voting systems, usually the incentives and like it's intentionally designed into the incentive structure is you're trying to gain representation,
right?
You're not trying to block
right
other people's representation, if to put it that way. I don't know. Anyway, and so I think that's basically what you were saying right there.
Right. I think the concern is that by having that none of the below option, it might change people's strategy where they're trying to block rather than to support. But I honestly am not that certain of how this would play out. I think it needs more studying, at least for the star voting side, and I'd be curious to know if this has been used for ranked choice voting for STV. And if so, how that's
And
gone.
running simulated elections and all that
Yeah,
type of stuff. Doing the hard numbers research, all that would be
yeah,
very interesting.
yeah, it would be. So yeah, I don't really have anything else to say, but I appreciate you clarifying that.
Or I should say very interesting for some of us in the room. Not for everyone. Anyone else on this particular one? Okay, well, as we can see, this one received over 3/4 support. There was a larger chunk of opposition than we saw with the other ones. But again, pretty overwhelming in favor. All right, thank you, everyone. And Pablo, would you please pull up the next? All right, this one is overwhelmingly simple and overwhelmingly supported. Marion, you had the specific language choice here, so do you want to talk about it a moment?
Yeah, well, we have our board of directors, which we like to call the board. And now we have the public policy board, which we has also a similar name. And we thought that that was getting confusing. It also, the language, having them originally, the intent was to kind of put them on the same level of decision making, but truly the board of directors does have, you know, like the responsibility for the final say. And so we went through a list of names, you know, ministry, commission. We played with many many different ones, and I decided to go through Robert's rules and kind of check to see if we were doing anything that had weird legal implications. And I thought council was a nice choice for renaming, because they basically are counseling the board on how to use our voice. So
Yes, and also then we'll have, you pointed this out, you will have directors and we'll have counselors, and that there will be a easy distinction there for use in everyday language, which those of us within the party structure sometimes will find more benefit in than others, perhaps.
Well, and it sounds much more advisory, which is one of the reasons I kind of like it. So
I'm just going to be pumped to no longer share an acronym with the Praetorian Guard of the Portland city government. So
big added bonus.
Oh yes, the Portland Police Bureau is not a wing of the Libertarian Party. It should not be confused as such. Okay, any further comments on this one? Again, very simple one. All right, Pablo, we can pull up the next option. All right. Elections at the Libertarian Party of Oregon Convention. And this one has definitely been the most mixed of the ones that we've looked at so far, falling below 3/4 support. And the particular reason for those of you at home that might be interested in as to why we would be caring more about the proportions once it's getting down to 3/4 or so is that all of our bylaws actually have to pass both convention and a referral to the membership by 2/3. So if we have something that has 50% support, it's actually not really a bylaws amendment that we would likely consider very strongly presenting at convention without having a very good reason to do so. And then at 2/3, we would definitely be wanting to look at making significant changes to it, or possibly doing so in order to alleviate whatever the concerns of the minority on not wanting the change might be suggesting that would make it more comfortable for them. Because we want to be proposing changes that the membership sees as valuable, and that will not be spending a lot of time at convention debating and amending. So the reasoning here was largely that we are going to be holding a biennial convention anyway. And so we could be possibly spending fewer resources if we were to be holding nominating conventions instead of sending out ballots to all 20,000 some odd members of the Libertarian Party of Oregon. And then we also have another proposal where we're looking at potentially having annual conventions. And I think that we're going to have a note on the popularity of that proposal as well. So any comments?
Yes.
Before we move it on, I think while we could specify in this bylaws amendment, I think it's already written into our bylaws that you could opt in for a paper ballot for these elections, which would mean that even people who have scheduling conflicts for attending the convention, even remotely, should be able to vote in this election with a paper ballot. Is that correct?
Generally, no, I don't think that is accurate. The bylaws allow that if there are insufficient funds for conducting an election, or it may not be related to the sufficiency of funds, but I off the top of my head, I believe it is, then the board may choose to instead nominate by convention, with the idea being that we could meet in a parking lot somewhere, hold a convention, and thereby save a lot of money.
Right.
If we were pushed to that extreme. But in that instance, you're conducting the nomination in an entirely separate way. So the ability to request paper ballots doesn't apply. Now, if that were something that were desired, then we could potentially craft this proposal to allow for that sort of a thing. But that isn't my understanding of how it would operate.
Okay.
Peter, I believe that you were speaking up.
Yeah, I guess the obvious thing here, which maybe there's a way to square this, but we often don't make quorum at convention. So it might be difficult if the election is supposed to take place there, unless there's some type of a backup, like people that want to vote, like can vote before the election. We just announce the votes at the election, or the results at the convention. But
right, I think that the bylaws committee, while not having yet written it down in formal language, was talking about having a backup to this. So if this were made to be the primary method, then the backup would be that we could still hold some sort of a paper ballot or electronically balloted election. And the other part of it was that a consideration would be that if this is the avenue for nominating candidates or electing leadership, that might drive more interest in the conventions. These are questions that are unanswerable unless we try it out, and again, this dipped below that 3/4 mark where it seems safer to assume that it would pass. And so it's definitely going to be being approached cautiously by the bylaws committee and the board of directors.
And just, I would like to add one thing. I do think it is interesting and unique in my limited knowledge of what other Libertarian Party organizations do in the other states. I think the LPO is unique in that its elections are separate from convention. It does seem, at least perception-wise, that most of the other parties do elect their leadership at convention. And I also do not hear of them having the same history of being unable to make quorum. There is no incentive to go to our convention right now because I think there's a separation of leadership elections from the business of the convention, and there's a frisson of like excitement in being able to pick your leaders there. And I would like to comment out that is resolutely opposed. The party belongs to people who show up. And if you cannot make with a year or longer of notice of when there's gonna be a convention, I don't know what to tell you. This might not be the right, political action, political organizing might be too hard.
Okay, thank you. And Annie.
Yeah, I think if we were to start doing the voting at the convention, there's already, I think, controversy around, whether the location is near Portland or not, because obviously people in the eastern counties or, even in the South feel slighted when it's held near Portland. In a lot of ways, it makes sense to be near Portland because that's where the population center is. So that there's already that conflict, and I think the conflict could be made more contentious if people, some people have to travel farther to make their vote than other people.
My personal dream, it would be to have the counties banding together to gain representation in LPO leadership, but we don't have enough active county parties yet to make that a reality. Gregor, please.
I have gathered from conversations with LPO members on the Discord and such that there is a push for an electronic voting system. Is that not true?
This election,
Not this election, because we have to put it in place first.
So this leadership election that is currently being conducted is electronic.
Okay. Oh, that's right. We passed something on the paper ballot to allow that to happen. So now, if remote attendees, will they have the ability to vote? Because I mean, you opened up the
right. So often with, or I shouldn't say often. There have been examples in the recent past due to lockdown measures where there was a large amount of remote attendance for conventions. Again, we aren't electing leadership at our convention, but we did have remote attendance. But at the National Libertarian Party convention and the remote attendees, basically the elections weren't by raising your hand. Usually such elections are conducted by ballot. And so it's simply, instead of doing a paper physical ballot, there was an electronic component. And at the national party, the votes are gathered by delegate chairs. There's various bylaws requirements that the national party has that we don't necessarily. And so each state delegation chair was responsible for collecting the votes from their people, whether it was in person or remotely, and then presenting those to the secretary. In our case, we would probably use whatever electronic software solution that that either the board of directors or the convention committee were to settle on as being a suitable option. This particular election, we're using Election Buddy, but in future iterations, I believe that the Star voting app may become available for such things, and then there's always more options popping up here and there. And so I can't speak as to, of course, exactly what solution would be implemented, but I would expect that it would be a voting software that would be accessible by remote attendees.
Okay, yeah, because I mean, I understand the fear in the resolutely opposed statement. I acknowledge the fear, and but I also sort of agree with Peter that I don't have a right to bitch if I don't show up. So, and to be honest, we're doing it on a Sunday this year, and Sundays are kind of sacred to me. I'm not sure I'm going to be. I've not decided whether I'm showing up myself or not to that convention. But anyway, thank you. So yeah, that makes it perfectly clear. And I remember being in support of this when I filled out the survey. So let's move on.
Okay. Any other comments on this before we keep it moving? All right, Pablo. And Pablo, how many more do we have? And I only ask because my wife wants me to come to dinner. 3 more. All right, thank you. Yeah, we don't have a lot of proposals. We were aiming at having ones that would have more consensus. So require the board to appoint a deputy treasurer. The reasoning being that can be a lot for one person to take on. There is a comment here that has drawn the attention of the bylaws committee that there's no reason for the bylaws to change in order to do this. I personally do like the idea of putting it there as almost like an institutional memory and kind of forced best practices thing. But as far as I can tell, there's no particular reason. So I guess the concern in my mind that the bylaws committee will have to be careful of is making sure that we're not somehow abrogating that in the current state of the bylaws, that we would not somehow be stepping on into having a volunteer stepping into the role of the treasurer and taking on something that they shouldn't be. The duties of the treasurer as described in our bylaws are fairly broad. And so whether or not the board of directors can take action and hand those over to someone else, or if it's okay, as long as the treasurer is okay with it, or what have you, we're just going to need to look at that a little more carefully, which we'll probably do in our next meeting.
Yeah, so big thank you to the careful comment on that one.
All right, are there any further comments on this particular one? All right, the next one is making conventions an annual event. This one is split, but pretty strongly in favor, just not unanimous. And very simple proposal, make conventions an annual event. Does anyone have any comments on it?
I just have a question. I imagine the conventions are somewhat expensive to run. So how does this impact the budget?
Right. So part of the question here is whether or not conventions might be conducted at elections might be conducted at conventions. And so that I'm not saying that the proposals go together. They obviously are separate, but we kind of expected that support for the one would imply support for the other, and kind of wanted to put them both out there to see what people thought. And that's kind of what we're getting. It does definitely cost money, and it also has some really great upsides. Libertarians love being able to get together and talk to each other. It's the largest get together that we have all year, or I should say every 2 years. And also the hope would be that having them more frequently would kind of keep them on people's radar. If it's something that happens every couple of years, it's less it's more easy for people to schedule a conflict rather than expecting that, oh yeah, I'm gonna be doing this every spring, showing up, maybe voting in elections, maybe not, but at least having something where it's more consistent. The hope would be to drive for higher attendance, and that in turn drives higher engagement, more donations, et cetera, et cetera. That's the hope. But as far as just like on the face of it, yes, it would probably cost more money.
Don't have to get into it too much here because I know you're crunched for time, Timothy, but I think I'm against this just because I feel like it's going to be really expensive, and I feel like we're just constantly going to be preparing for the next convention because we never have a break. But just my opinion.
Fair enough. Thank you. Marion, go ahead, and then Gregor.
Yeah, I wonder if in the spirit of the comment on the previous survey question, special conventions can be called. Could this be just something that you do when you've got the spare volunteers and the cash?
Right. So the board of directors and the membership, for that matter, do have the ability to call a special convention at any time. So that's worth noting. Like, the option is there to make conventions an annual event. And I will say that there was an attempt to hold a convention in the spring of 2020, which, as you may imagine, did not end up working out. All right, Gregor, you raised your hand.
Board positions have a term of
2 years.
Yeah.
So
would we
it's
then be dividing up the board to have half of it each year? If it would be that part of the plan?
I think that the plan was to continue with the cycle of having leadership elected in odd number years, and then the idea of the even numbered conventions would be that it's another crack at bylaws amendments and resolutions and policy policy platform amendments and what have you. But then again, we were wanting to kind of marry it to the idea of if we're going to have elections at convention. And so the candidates for public office being in the even numbered year conventions, and then the internal elections being for odd years.
Thank you.
Anything else on this one?
Sorry, so you said elections for public office, but for some reason it didn't pick up on the fact that that was part of the earlier proposal, that public office would also happen at convention. Is that, am I understanding that right?
I'm not remembering the exact language, Marion.
Oh, okay. I see Marion shaking her head no.
I believe we only added leadership elections to the convention.
Okay, that's what I remembered.
Okay, I could be off base there then. We probably discussed it, and then I didn't remember what the final version going out to survey was. I can lose track of things on occasion. Not an issue. Anything further before we move along? Okay, well, let's go to the next one, Pablo.
And this is just the final question. We had some people make some comments in response to our comments on these proposals or other bylaw amendments we should consider at the 2023 convention.
All right, so there's some, I think this first comment isn't necessarily focused on the bylaws amendment proposals. And then the middle two here are primarily related to the Public Policy Board, making suggestions that the Bylaws Committee will take into account. Go ahead, Marion.
I will say that one of the things that was discussed in the bylaws committee is that we decided not to make substantive changes to the public policy board or offer any amendments that would make substantive changes to the public policy board, even though we did discuss especially changing the size. And the reasoning for that is that we are still on the sort of interim introductory appointed public policy board, and they have not yet had their first full year of elected by the membership task doing. So the decision was, because, you know, we passed it and ratified it, so we might as well let it have one full term of doing their thing before we try and change it.
Right, so it was brought up to the previous convention, passed, and then was passed by the membership, and since September, I believe it is, we've had a interim version of the Public Policy Board that was selected by the Board of Directors. And one of the things observed by this interim Public Policy Board, or hopefully soon Public Policy Council, has been that a large membership has some drawbacks. It's currently 11 members, and there's a desire to make that fewer, to make that body more nimble, or possibly to make it a bylaws directed subcommittee of the Board of Directors, or there's a number of ideas going around as far as changes that could happen. But the bylaws committee in particular, the Board of Directors could choose otherwise, but the bylaws committee didn't think that such large changes should be proposed until the body had had an opportunity to have a full term as it was enacted by the convention and the membership. And we'll see. There may even be proposals from the floor at convention to make changes. The bylaws committee is just a few people doing what they think is best. We'll see what the membership and the Board of Directors wants to do. Anything else on these comments?
I do like the second bullet and talking about the structure of the LPO being way too bureaucratic. All I have is the California and Illinois LPs to sort of compare it to. And I feel that they are a little more streamlined, and it is something for those of us who are going to be here for a few years to think about in future conventions to address.
Well, if you want to just delegate more powers to me, that would make everything so much simpler. I'm kidding. Please don't. All right. We will be closing this off then. And thank you everyone for coming. Is there any last comment overall on the survey, or
I just had one
anything
question.
else that the bylaws should be looking at, committee should be looking at? Go ahead, Peter.
I guess it wasn't sound out to the members, but I know there's some talk of reducing the size of the public policy board because it's very difficult to get enough people to volunteer after the regular board has already been signed. Sounds like some people had some reservations about that. Since that wasn't included in the survey, I'm planning on talking to people at the convention and trying to gauge the level of support for something like that. Just FYI.
Yeah. So
How many seats are currently filled on the Policy Council board?
I
We
believe that
filled all
there's
but
10.
one, but I don't think we have enough people that even ran for election to fill it this year.
10
Right.
of 11, yes.
So it was initially populated with 11 volunteers. One of them resigned in January or February. Peter, you or Marion, you would know better than I. And then that position has not yet been filled, and I believe we have 9 candidates running for the 11 seats currently.
There's also the
with
issue
write-ins.
of scheduling the 11 people. It's been difficult to make quorum at meetings.
Maybe we don't have to discuss it now. Just wanted you to know that there are people that are interested in doing that. So
Yes, we definitely recognize that, and again, that may be something that ends up happening. In any case, this next iteration of the Public Policy Board wouldn't be affected, and we wanted to let the next iteration have the opportunity to have a full term doing it as it was already passed by convention and membership. So we'll see what happens. All right. Thank you, everyone. Pablo, anything else before we head out?
think that's it. Thank you everyone for attending. Hopefully see you tomorrow or Friday for we're going to do something similar, but we're going to do it with the leadership candidates for Public Policy Board and the Board of Directors. So yeah, thank you.
Thanks.
Good night.